out that I actually had. Hello, I'm Derek, alcoholic. Wow. I'm really, really grateful to be here, grateful to be sober. It's an honor to be asked to speak in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And my sponsor told me years ago it also comes with a great deal of responsibility, because this may be the first exposure someone has to Alcoholics Anonymous, and hopefully not their last because of what I share. So there's a few things that I know, and there's a few things that I believe, and then there's a whole bunch of things I have an opinion about in Alcoholics Anonymous. And you're going to get a combination of all of those things. One of the things we read in meetings often is a portion of chapter 5, what we were like, what happened, and what we are like today. Probably one of the most misquoted. I hear people say what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. My sponsor told me it's not any different. It will never be any different. The liquor stores, the bars, the streets, the dope houses, it doesn't change. But we do. So our stories disclose in a general way what we were like. Now I have to fill up like 50 minutes, so I'm going to be a little more than general so I can take up enough time. So I grew up here in Salt Lake. I grew up in a household where my mother was a stay-at-home mom. She was a very kind, loving, extremely OCD personality. And my father was a daily beer drinker. And I rarely saw him drunk. But when I did see him drunk, it was when we were out fishing with his buddies, or we were camping, or we were doing things, and it was an act of celebration. And when he would get drunk, I would see this warmth come over him, and a grin, and he would be kind of somewhat animated. Now, to me, to drink was to relax, it was to party, it was to celebrate. Now, I don't remember my first drink because my dad would send me to the fridge to get him a fresh can of Coors, and I was probably 5 years old when I would start cracking them open and take a little sip off it as I was bringing it back to him. So I don't remember my first drink, but I do remember my first drunk. And I stole a fifth of whiskey out of his liquor cabinet. I just took the whole bottle. I didn't cheat any out of it and try and fill it back up with water. I just took the whole bottle. And my buddy and I drank that bottle of whiskey and washed it down with a 6-pack of beer. And what I can tell you was that I experienced something that I'd never experienced up to that point. I didn't know how insecure I was. I didn't know how afraid, how anxious, until it began to go away. And it was magical. And for every day that I had an opportunity after that to get drunk, I did. And then I turned 13, and after school one day, my buddy asked me if I wanted to go smoke some weed. Now, I didn't contemplate, I didn't go, God, maybe should I do that? Maybe my parents are going to be mad. I said, yeah, let's do that. And I got drunk and high every day for the next 5 years. And I did every drug, anything that was slid across the table and said, Derek, you need to try this. And I did it without hesitation, without thought or consideration for self-preservation. Now, some of those things I liked better than others, and so I would do more, and some of those things I wouldn't do again because I didn't like that so much. Because of my age, I started to develop a criminal history, so I'm also a recovering criminal, as a few of us in here are. So when I was 18 years old, I found myself sitting in the Salt Lake County Jail, facing a prison sentence, and I have had to pull my criminal record for some stuff over the years, and when I was booked into jail, again, I was 18 years old. I weighed 147 pounds. I had beautiful, golden, long, blonde hair. And the thought of going to prison at that point I was a little scared and a little too cute. And so I was sitting in jail, and a pretrial officer came in, pulled me out of my cell, sat down with me, told me that that she had talked to my parents, and that I had the option to go to treatment, or I could wait to see the judge. Now, at this point, I'd been in jail for about 4 days, and I didn't know what treatment meant, but I knew it had to be better than where I was at. So I was released from jail. My father came and picked me up, and for any of you that are old enough to have gone to the old Salt Lake County Jail, and you came up this tunnel, sunlight, we get out of that tunnel, and we get in my dad's car, and he drives me to the treatment center, and he does not say one word to me. And so they dropped me off at this treatment center, and it was a treatment center that was 12-step based. They had meetings 3 times a week in the facility. And so I was exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I don't really know how to explain certain things about myself and about my experience, but there was an immediate connection to the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. There was an immediate connection to something in it, and I've heard the term used, the language of the heart. But there was something about them being alcoholics and addicts, because all of my friends that I ran with, for the most part, were alcoholics and addicts. They were my people. They've been my people. You are my people. Now, because I had so much heat on my ass, I was highly, highly motivated to follow some direction. Now, we talk about the only requirement for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous is a desire to stop drinking. I don't know that I had a desire to stop drinking. I just had a desire to not go to prison. But during the process of that, I spent 34 days in a nice hospital setting, treatment center, where they got like the pudding cups and a nice refrigerator, and it's like really clean and sterile, and it was nice. And I was there for 34 days, and then I left there and went to a residential treatment center down on South Temple that was not so much that way. It was basically ran by the residents and the steering committee. And what happened in there is that I really began to make some bonds with other people. I got through my criminal stuff. I had my day in court. And again, for those of you that have experienced this, the judge reads the charge, reads the sentence, suspended. Reads the charge, reads the sentence, suspended. So on, so on. And I walked out of that courtroom, and I did not spend one more day in jail. I got put on probation. And I literally had this thought, this AA thing really works. So now I launch into this new life, about 9 months sober at that point, and I began to utilize Alcoholics Anonymous the same way I did everything else in my life. I came and took what I wanted, did what I wanted. And part of the reason for this is my excuse, and these are going to be some of my opinions that I'm going to share, is one of the things that I heard early on in Alcoholics Anonymous is take what you need and leave the rest. This was not very good advice for me. I think a better set of advice would be do everything and then figure out what works for you and what level you need to keep doing that to be okay. That would have been a little better advice than take what you need and leave the rest, because what I thought I needed was I needed a girlfriend, I needed a job, I needed some money, I needed some friends, I needed another girlfriend, and because of that, I stayed out too late, and then I needed another job, so I had to find somebody to get another job if you kind of follow the pattern here. So when I was about 2.5 years sober, I was going back to that residential treatment center. There was a meeting on Tuesday nights. There's still a meeting there on Tuesday nights. And I walked in there one night, and there she was. She was beautiful. She was like 38 days sober. She was pregnant within about a week. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? So at about 3.5 years sober, my daughter was born. And her mother was about 10 months sober. But leading up to my daughter being born, that relationship got very, very volatile. And I was not equipped or prepared for what was going to be in front of me. So shortly after my daughter was born, she and I parted ways. And at this point, I was active. I would go down to the Alano Club frequently. I went to a lot of meetings. But so did she. And I was the bad guy. And I couldn't see my daughter. And I was this horrible person. And pretty soon, this feeling of resentment and anger and self-pity overtook me. And on a Tuesday night, sitting on the stage at the Alano Club, a week shy of 4 years of sobriety, my friend Mike asked me what I was doing after the meeting. I said, I'm going to go to the bar and I'm going to get drunk. And I left that AA meeting and I went to the bar, and for the first time as an adult, I ordered a drink. And by the time I got through the second or third drink, that magic feeling came over me. I got exactly what I was looking for. I got that sense of relief, that ease and comfort. And I could breathe. And 7 days later, I came to in VOA detox, and I had lost my job, got kicked out of the place I was living, had everything I owned stuffed in my car, and had my motorcycle stolen from the bar. So 3 years, 11 months, and 3 weeks of sobriety burned down in 7 days. And so I come back to Alcoholics Anonymous with my tail between my legs. Now, the interesting thing about that night that I drank is I honestly believed that I would never drink again. I honestly believed that my fear about going to prison, about all of that stuff, that I would never drink again. As I'm pouring the first drink down my belly, that I would never drink again. And this started a very, very painful time in my life and for the people around me. Because I'd get sober for a few days, a few weeks, a few months, and the pain and the fear and the self-pity and the self-loathing would overload me, and I would go drink again. And I would drink until the fear and the pain and the self-loathing would overrun me, and I'd come back and I would get sober. And I got in this vicious cycle where I couldn't stay drunk and I couldn't stay sober. My family, my friends, they'd see me get sober, and I would rebound quickly, and I'd kind of land back on my feet, and I'd get some things going, and Derek's doing good. Where's Derek? Oh, I think he's in Atlanta with some girl drunk. That's probably where he's at. So there's a real story around Atlanta, and it's kind of a significant story. I was coming home from the bar one night, and I'd had way, way, way too much to drink. And I was about 6 blocks away from my house, and I think I decided I was probably close enough to being home to go ahead and call it a night. So as I plowed into this telephone pole head on doing about 55 or 60 miles an hour and put myself through the windshield, ended up in the emergency room. I literally scalped myself. Had hundreds and hundreds of stitches and plastic surgery to put my face back together. I got a DUI that night. Don't really remember it, but they didn't forget. And so as soon as I could, I went into the judge, and I pleaded guilty to the DUI because I just wanted to get the clock ticking to get my driver's license back. And so the judge told me I had to go and meet these requirements, go to these DUI classes, and go to get my card signed at AA meetings. And this was stuff that was all super easy for me to do at this point. I'd been doing it for a number of years, right? Like I could just plug right in, fit right back in. And I was so grateful that it was a telephone pole that I hit. That it wasn't somebody walking down the street, it wasn't a car head on, it wasn't... Because I have friends in Alcoholics Anonymous that don't get to share that story. That it was another car. It was a pedestrian. And those people did die. So I was super grateful. I knew that I was never going to drink again. And 90 days later, I'd satisfied what I needed for the judge. There was a girl involved again. She wanted to go see her family in Atlanta. Seemed like a good idea at the time. And we jumped in her car, and I was drunk before we were halfway across Wyoming. Behind the wheel, drunk, for 5, 6, 7 weeks or so in a row before I made it back here, sobered up again. So fast forward, 1992, sometime after that event happened, I found myself in a dilemma, and it was an internal dilemma. The thoughts of suicide, the self-hatred had settled in so deep that I just couldn't keep going. I couldn't medicate myself enough to shut that off. And I was working for this guy that had gone through treatment, and he didn't go to AA meetings. So I'm like, I want to go to the treatment center that guy went to so I don't have to go to AA meetings anymore. Whatever he got there, I want to do that. So I showed up at that treatment center at about 3 o'clock in the morning. There was an incident. I was drunk. Instead of getting into treatment, I got into jail. But the following day, when they found out that I actually had insurance, they were very apologetic and let me back into the treatment center. Now, I don't know exactly what happened when I went into the treatment center. I know that my blood pressure was through the ceiling, my stomach was distended, I was having some pretty bad physical issues, my esophagus was swelling shut. But I'd been in there for a couple of days in detox. And when I say a couple of days, it could have been 1 day, it could have been 5, I don't really remember. I just remember kind of coming to and being alert again, and they called me into the administrator's office because they needed to do some paperwork now that I was coherent. And they let me know how much my insurance was going to cover and how much it was going to cost me out of pocket. And when they told me how much it was going to cost me out of pocket, I'm like, oh, I've made a big mistake. Yeah, I don't need to be here. I think I'll just leave. Now, the reason I share this story is that I heard really stupid things in AA meetings, like, your higher power can be anything. It could be a doorknob. And I thought, well, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Until that day, when I went to leave, and there were no doorknobs on my side of the door. Because I was locked down. I was in a psychiatric unit. Like, leaving, right, was not an option. I was calling out for that doorknob, right? Please save me. But I eventually did wiggle my way out of there, as I had wiggled my way out of a lot of things, because I bounce back very quickly. I pull my faculties together. I say the right things. And they let me go. And I showed back up at the club. There's a handful of people in here that will remember my old sponsor, Ron Aist. Most of you don't. He was a man that you either loved him or you absolutely hated him. Now, I love the man, and I'm alive today because of him. But He was a soapbox AA member. You fuckers are all doing it wrong. Why are you talking about that? Shut up, sit down, whatever. But what that man did is he took countless hours and sat down with me and took me through the book. He gave me a place to live. He took me off the street. He put me together with a group of guys that were all staying sober and taught me connection and brotherhood. Okay, I need to move on from that. And I had this newfound commitment to sobriety. And I went through the steps, and I got a home group, started sponsoring some guys, got married, bought a house. Life was looking pretty good. And I was about 4.5 or so years sober, and this particular wife, I have a couple of those as the story progresses, but this particular wife wanted to have a family. She wanted to have a baby. And with everything that I had experienced with baby mama number one, I just couldn't do it. And we sat down one day, and she said, "It's too important and it's too big of a deal to me. I want to have a family." And I said, I can't do that. And she literally packed her stuff and left the next day. There was no fight. It just was, we were not on the same page. So now I'm 4.5 years sober, looking good, feeling good, got a few bucks in my pocket, got a decent car, got a house. My success rate in dating in AA hadn't been super stellar, so I thought the bars would be a much better place for me to meet women. So I'm sitting in the bar one night, fast forward about 5 months, and I had slowly stopped doing all the things that I'd been doing. I'd been serving on the board at the Alano Club at the time, and there was a lot of controversy and drama and whatever, and I was stewing, and I was full of this resentment and upset and anxiety. And I'm sitting in the bar with my buddy, who had been sober in AA for 8 years, and he was drinking. And he was with his girlfriend, and they were laughing, and they were dancing, and they were having fun. And I sat there, and I drank my water. And I sat there, and I drank my water. Stewing. And the waitress walks up, "Can I get you something?" And I ordered a drink. And I drank that drink. And I drank that drink because I didn't care. And nothing happened that night. No DUI, no wrecked car. And I thought, well, maybe I've been overreacting about this whole AA thing, so I went to the liquor store the next day. And 60 days later, I come to, and I'm in uni. And I've now OD'd on benzos and booze and whatever else was in my system. Not intentionally. I think I may have forgotten how many I'd taken and drinking and which day of the week it was. And so I come to, and I'm in uni going, like, what was that? So I come crawling back to AA again. And now I really got my tail between my legs. Almost 5 years sober, fucking big shot, super cool. And now I'm a newcomer again. And I'm humiliated. But I don't know where else to go. So I'm coming down to the club, and I'm going to meetings. And one Saturday I come down to the club, I'm on my motorcycle, and there's this cute little blonde downstairs, and she says, "Is that your motorcycle?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Will you take me for a ride?" So she moved in that day. And you're going to see a pattern developing here. So she'd been at my house for maybe 2 weeks, and she had pancreatitis really bad. And so drinking was not really much of an option for her. And I was sober at the time, but it was now, again, it's a Saturday morning, and she says, God, I'd really like to smoke some weed. And that's a good idea. I never got in trouble when I smoke weed. I'm just mellow when I smoke weed. I did not draw a sober breath for 3.5 more years. Now, when I say I didn't draw a sober breath, that doesn't necessarily mean that I was drinking every day, but I was medicating myself with something. And that's where that portion of chapter 3, try this, try that, mix this, mix that, and that part where it talks about the more I withdrew. I stopped going out. I stopped going to the bars. I stopped going to the parties. I stayed home. I would have a few people come over to my house that drank like me. My buddy had 8 years of sobriety that I drank with. He was my friend since I was 12. Sorry, some of this stuff makes me emotional. He got buried last year. He didn't sober up, and he literally drank himself to death. And it was horrible to watch. His stomach was out like this, his leg was black, his feet were swollen. But he would not come back to AA. Fuck you guys. Fuck those guys at the club. He loved me, but he hated all of you and drank himself to death. So, there's a number of people in this room that have heard me share my story before. Unfortunately, I only have one story, so but I was about 2 or 2.5 years into this adventure, and I start coming to every morning. And you know that place where you're not quite awake and you're not quite asleep? And the first thought that would come into my head is, why don't you kill yourself? What's the point? Why don't you kill yourself? What's the point? And I would roll over and I would medicate myself and I would go. And I would go do this job that I'd got, because now I'm working with my buddy that I started drinking with, and he doesn't care if I'm sober, he just cares if I show up. So I'm going to work, I'm paying some bills. I'm with you guys. I would be leaving too. But it just goes on, and the misery, and the pain, and the self-hatred. And then a day came, and I don't know how to explain it exactly. It started with one morning I told that girl, because that girl was still there. This is 3 years later. She's still living there. I told her she had to go. Now, I didn't know how powerful that decision was, but I just could not stop doing what I was doing. And she left, and a few weeks later, I showed up at the Alano Club on a Wednesday night. It was the biker meeting. And I went up to that meeting, and it was loud and rude and rambunctious, and I think they were having a business meeting, and one guy was telling another guy to go screw himself and whatever, and storming out, and I went, well, this is kind of cool. Now, honestly, I don't remember if I was sober that day, but I came back to the club the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and I started to string some days together. Now, coming back, I did not declare that I was back. I didn't declare that it was different this time. I didn't declare why it was this different this time. I didn't get a home group. I didn't get a sponsor. I didn't do 90 meetings in 90 days. And the reason I didn't do any of that is because I was pretty certain I wasn't going to stay sober, and there was no reason for me to have anybody get attached to me again, to make any commitments that I was going to fail again. And so I would just show up to the club. And I would sit outside on the picnic bench, or I'd sit downstairs in the dining room, and I'd sit with those old guys, and I'd listen to them talk, and if they engaged me in the conversation, I would talk. And I began to string some days together. I got married early in my sobriety, again, this time. So, I was a few months sober. I went to the God camp out, and guess what? There she was. But she was like 8 years sober. And she had a career, and she had her own house, and she had her shit together, so I was certain that it would be different this time. And it was. But we were married 3 months later. And again, anything worth doing is worth doing yesterday, right? Now, before that happened, when she and I had started dating, I was kind of staying at her house intermittently, and then there was a weekend she was out of town. And this was only a couple weeks after we'd started dating. And so I was at my house, and I was going through some stuff, and I came across the stash. I went, oh. So what do? Find a lighter. That's what you do when you find a stash. So I get high for a couple of 2 or 3 days. Well, on one of these particular days, I take my motorcycle up the canyon, up Guardsman's Pass, and I'm with a sober member in AA, and we're burning through the turns, and I think I know where I'm at, doing about 60 or 70 miles an hour, and go, oh shit, I don't know where I'm at, and I crash. I go over the edge of a cliff on my motorcycle. And these are things that I cannot explain, but I literally had a scratch about the size of a dime on my shoulder blade that barely caught the edge of the road before I flew off the edge of the cliff. And then I landed at the bottom on my feet, standing there looking back up, going, well, that was interesting. So that happens to be my sobriety date, okay, the following day. I think it was higher power running it past me just one more time. Look, dummy. I only have so many of these left for you, okay? But I didn't tell anybody that I had gotten high those few days. So February comes, and my now new wife thinks that I'm supposed to be picking up a 1-year chip in AA. So what do? Pick up a 1-year chip in AA. Right? Now, at this point, I am re-engaging. I'm back in recovery. And I only have to be true to myself, right? To thine own self be true. I've had so many sobriety dates. What difference does it make? Nobody cares. So I only celebrated my birthday on the wrong year for about 6 years. But the time came that I had to get rid of that. It was the only thing I had left. I'd cleaned up everything else. I'd done all these amends. I had done all this stuff. I'd reached a level of success that I'd never reached. I'd got the beautiful home on the east side, and I had a cool car, and I had all this cool shit. But that thing was just eating at me. So that's when I got the sponsor that I've had for the last however many years now. And when I got to this in my 5th step and I disclosed that, he laughed literally out loud at me. Like, dude, like, what is wrong with you? 6 years? You carried this for 6 years? All you had to do was just say something. And I'm like, well, I wasn't afraid of the people in AA. I'm afraid of my wife, right? Anyway, she laughed at me too. And the significance of all of these things for me is that friendly reminder that I'm a really, really slow learner, and I'm a really, really fast forgetter. That the 10,000 AA meetings or whatever that I've been to over the last 37 years that I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous, the countless times that I have prayed and meditated and sat down with another alcoholic and sat down with a therapist and sat down with my sponsor, sat down and read the book, read another book, read this book, read that book, went to that meditation group, went to this retreat, went to the monastery, went to whatever. The alcoholic ego is relentless, does not care about all those things that I've done. Doesn't care about all the days of sobriety behind me. Doesn't care about the accomplishments or the failures. So the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous mean something different to me today than they did 37 years ago in how I apply them in my life. So step one, I didn't realize that I was working on step one when I was 12, but looking back, right? I surrendered to the alcohol and drugs at first pass. Abandoned myself completely. When I first started drinking and using drugs, they could have just had a brochure that was the 9-step promises. This is what drugs and alcohol are going to give you. You're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. Right? Fear of people and economic insecurity is going to leave you. Right? You're suddenly going to realize that this is going to do for you what you can't do for yourself. It's fucking magic. Right? Which is interesting because I abandoned myself to that without thought. Then I get to AA and I'm like, that might be a little uncomfortable, or that's awkward, or that's dumb. So there's a few things over the years that I've had to adjust and adapt to in Alcoholics Anonymous. And some of my opinions aren't super popular, right? Like, we can create our own concept of a higher power. Now, for me, that's probably not a job that's best suited for me to create. Okay? Here's what I'm probably capable of. Taking responsibility for my side of the relationship. That I can probably handle. Defining what God is and what God isn't and what God's job and role is supposed to be in my life. I just want him to be Santa Claus. Okay? And I don't want the black marks to count against me. Like I want the Jesus part where I'm automatically forgiven, and then I want the Santa Claus part where all the gifts show up. Right? Sounds pretty good, but not very effective for me because there's no accountability in any of that in that relationship with higher power. But so step one, to me today, is I admit that I am powerless. I don't have to put the word alcohol behind that at this point in my life. If you're new and you're just getting sober, whatever that word is, I'm powerless over heroin, I'm powerless over alcohol. If you're a heroin addict and you're in Alcoholics Anonymous, again, this is going to be one of my opinions. If you're a heroin addict and you're in Alcoholics Anonymous, the only question I'd ask you to ask yourself is, can you safely drink without sticking a needle in your arm? Because if you can, you might not need to be here. But if that drink leads you to the needle, I call that powerless over alcohol. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's my opinion. Because I'm powerless over people, places, and things. I'm powerless over the weather, politics, traffic, the people I work for, my beautiful wife. I'm powerless. Now, I'm not without influence. I'm not without a voice. But I'm powerless. The second half, and it says, we admitted we were powerless, hyphen, that our lives had become unmanageable. It doesn't say and this is what my sponsor explained to me. If the word and was in there, I could remove the alcohol or move whatever I would put behind the word powerless, and then everything would be okay. Remove the alcohol, my life is no longer unmanageable. But this alcoholic, you remove the alcohol, in here and in here, my life gets more unmanageable. Because I don't have a drinking problem, I have a sobriety problem. Right? The sobriety problem is that I can't get comfortable in my own skin. I can't get this head to shut up. I can't get this head to stop kicking my own ass, regretting all of those decisions, all of those actions, all of those things. I'm powerless. And when I live in a place that I don't accept that I'm powerless, now my life is unmanageable. So step 2 says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. For me, being restored to sanity is stop debating the first half of step 1. That's being restored to sanity. It's that simple to me today. When I'm in traffic and I'm aggravated, okay, I'm not letting go. I had a sponsor share a couple of little things with me in regards to this. You ever been standing in like the express line at the grocery store? Remember when people used to write checks and it would say cash only, 10 items or less, and there's some little old lady up there with 15 items and coupons and a check. And you're like, and I want to lose my mind. I want to go punch an 80-year-old woman in the throat because she is delaying me by minutes. By minutes. And I'm probably trying to hurry to get home so I can sit on the couch and do nothing. So my sponsor says, do you ever have those moments where you thought about somebody or you were talking about somebody and then you randomly ran into them? But everything had to be aligned perfectly for you to come around the corner at the grocery store and there's that person. Maybe, just maybe, higher power is just slowing you down to get you in the right place at the right time. Just accept that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And that whatever the holdup is to get you exactly to where you need to be. Now, I'm not telling you I actually believe that. Okay? I'd like to believe that. And I've had moments where I believe that. And then I have moments where my ego steps in and goes, well, that's just freaking ridiculous. But when I accept that, I'm free. My life is not unmanageable. So step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him. Him. Again, one of those things, God of my own definition. These are things that I've navigated through many years in Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, my opinion is not always super popular in this area. God as I understand God. That's how I read that step for me. I don't care how you do it. I don't care what your higher power is. New York Jimmy told me years ago, there's nothing more boring than being in an AA meeting listening to somebody give you their description of their higher power, because nobody gives a shit. But what does it mean to turn my will and my life over to the care of God? What it means to me is that I surrender to these 12 steps, these 12 principles, and the guidance of the members in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what it means to me. Now, what inspirational or intuitive thought may come along by practicing these principles that may be divinely passed down by a higher power, I don't know. I've had miracles happen in my life. I've had experiences. I've had moments of clarity that I cannot explain. But I have an ego that can discount it if I hold on to it long enough, if I try to explain it enough. And so where I'm going in these 12 steps is I'm trying to reduce and change my relationship with the alcoholic ego. Now, I don't know about you guys. The alcoholic ego that I live with has a self-destructive nature that few people out there in the planet could possibly ever understand. But I know there's a few people in this room that do understand. So I asked my sponsor, what does that mean? What is God's will? He said, look, dummy. That was what he said to me. Look, dummy. Why don't we just start with what we know God's will isn't? Let's start with God's will isn't to put other people's lives at risk by you being drunk behind the wheel of your car. And since you can't seem to drink without getting behind the wheel of your car, you probably had to not drink. Let's start with that. Let's let that be God's will, is for you to not drink today. Now, what do you need to do to stay comfortable enough in your own skin to not drink today? Well, probably go to a meeting, probably do some prayer and meditation, go to work, make a few bucks. Okay? Step 4 and 5 was very, very disheartening when I got done with my 5th step. And people have varying experience with the 5th step. Some people have this huge sense of relief, and just this very powerful experience. Some don't. When I got done with my 5th step, I was full of disgust and disdain in myself. And here's why. Because I had finally identified my core character defect. And of all the character defects it could have been, it was the last one I wanted it to be. Self-pity. Why can't it be anger, resentment? Why can't I be mad, mean? No, it's self-pity. Life's too hard. The weather's too hot. It's too cold. It's too slow. It's too fast. You're not nice enough. I don't have enough money. I've got all this money. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to be responsible? Oozing with self-pity. And when I live in a place of self-pity long enough, it manifests itself into depression. And it manifests itself into me pulling the car in the garage with the car running and closing the door. That's the kind of alcoholic I am, drunk or sober, if I stay in that place long enough. So, step 6 and 7, and it's written in the 12 and 12. This is the step that separates the men from the boys. Okay? The women from the girls. The theys from the thems, whatever. I'm confused now. Sorry, that was supposed to be funnier than I thought it was going to be. That was my first test run with that. I'll not do that one again. When I finally understood that self-pity was my primary core character defect, there were 2 things that happened. One was I actually had some clarity about what to ask higher power to remove, and 2, that I could start taking responsibility for it. I finally recognized it. I didn't know. I'd been in AA for 20-something years at that point, and I never knew that. Step 8 and 9 has allowed me to become a free man. I can go anywhere a free man can go, and I am not afraid of who I'm going to run into. Even baby mama, when I run into her, and she still seethes. Like there's fire in her eyes when she sees me. She hates my guts. My daughter's 33 years old. Her mother and I have not been together for 33 years, mind you. Okay? I don't care anymore. It's okay. And when I talk to my daughter and I talk to her about her mother, I go, you know what, sweetheart, you know that she loves you and she'd do anything for you, right? And that there's things about her that she doesn't choose, but you know that she loves you. That's how, when she's bashing her mother and she wants me to pile on with her, I do not. Because I've made amends to that woman and I don't want to do it again. Okay? That's the key part to that 9th step. I know my life and my sobriety depend absolutely on my side of the street being clean. And so having done a thorough 9th step and tried to continue to do a 10th step and clean things up as I go along, I don't have the luxury of that anymore. And I don't like making amends to people that I don't like, which are the people that I'm most likely to have to make amends to. So, step 11, sought through prayer and meditation. And meditation, probably the most unutilized tool in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know. Let's see, I was 11. About 26 years into Alcoholics Anonymous when I started meditating. So, pace yourself on these things. Now, some of you people know this, and my continued use of meditation is I do a mantra meditation in the morning in that place where I'm not quite awake and I'm not quite asleep and the alcoholic ego's waiting for me. Going to be easier to kill yourself than go to work today. It's going to be rough. You got to do the laundry. Maybe you could just kill yourself instead of doing the laundry, right? Now that seems dramatic, but that's the kind of bullshit that I got rattling around in my head. The next part of this is praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. Only. That completely removes my ego from the prayer. I'm not praying for your well-being and your health, for your child to live, for my friend Marty's leg to heal. No, my job is to ask higher power, how do I show up for this person? What would you have me do in their circumstance, in your will, not mine? And that was powerful for me, because I was raised where I would feel guilty at the end of every prayer because I'm pretty sure I left some people out, right? The birds and the bees and the ants and the starving kids in Ethiopia or something. I left something out, and I'm a horrible person. Well, I don't have to do that anymore because I'm only praying for God's will for me. How do I show up for you? Which leads me into step 12. And step 12 makes a serious assumption. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message, not my message, not the message I just shared with you. This message is the message of those 12 steps and those 12 principles. What I shared with you is my experience with them. I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 37 years. I've been sober 20 years in a row this time. I'm not the best shining example of these principles. The one thing that I've done is that I've kept coming back and I didn't die. My success rate in sponsoring guys, pretty iffy. But I've stayed sober. And I've made myself available. And I have done my best. And I've had friends like my friend Marty remind me, Derek, you're not a therapist. You're not a psychiatrist. That guy is crazy. Just read the book and stay out of his head. Okay? Because I'm dumb enough and arrogant enough that I think, maybe if I share a little bit of my experience about being crazy, he'll understand and it'll make him better. No. So Alcoholics Anonymous, at its purest form, is one alcoholic sitting down with another, sharing our experience to help facilitate some type of a spiritual experience so that that person can sit down with the next alcoholic, and so on and so on and so on. We gather in these meetings, in this fellowship. We have world conferences and conventions, and these things are all amazing. But at its purest form, Alcoholics Anonymous happens when I sit down with that guy and the light bulb comes on. And he gets at least enough to pass it on to the next guy. I've met thousands and thousands of people in Alcoholics Anonymous in the last 37 years, and hundreds of those people are still sober. And some of them have been sober the whole time. They've been sober the whole time because they were willing to go to any lengths when it mattered, and I wasn't. I think I've carried over too far. Thank you so much, one, for listening to me. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love drunks. I typically end it this way, my share this way, because it's just the truth, which is Alcoholics Anonymous saved my life. The people in Alcoholics Anonymous saved my life by being here every time I showed up. I'm here today, and I'm in the meetings that I'm in. I'm at my home group every Tuesday night because those guys were there for me. Because if we're not there for the next guy, if I get my prize and I go on my merry way out into the world, because I don't want to be around a bunch of toxic people, or I don't want to be around the drama, right? I didn't get sober to sit in AA meetings, all the things that I've heard over the years. The one thing I say to those people as I watch them exiting AA, telling me that they didn't get sober to sit in AA meetings, is I'm glad the person that helped you didn't feel that way. Fucker. So Alcoholics Anonymous has saved my life, and it's given me a life worth saving. So if you're new or you're renew, if you don't want what you have and are willing to go to any lengths to get something different, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. We have a solution. Thank you.